Can we have quiet, please? I'm Patty Muldoon. We are moving into our second debate. This is for Middlesex and Worcester District for State Senator. Each candidate will have 30 seconds for their opening statement and 1 minute for closing, 90 seconds for questions, and same question will be asked of both candidates. If I see a need for a follow-up, I may ask it. If I see an opportunity for a good rebuttal, I might ask it. Otherwise, we'll just go straight from one question to the next. Raise your hand if you've got a question or you need another card for your second great question. Someone will come and collect them. I would like to mention at the beginning of this debate, go to informedvoterma.org, the League of Women Voters website that will give you information on the ballot questions and more detailed information on the candidates that you will have. Thank you very much to ActonTV. This is being streamed live on Facebook, and you can catch it, and your friends can catch it later. So, you very active voters, please tell others. It will also be on the Minuteman Media Network for Concord and Carlisle. We've tossed a coin, as it were, to see who goes first. And I would like to introduce your three candidates. Senator James Eldridge is from Acton. He's the current senator for this district and is the Democratic nominee. Margaret Bussey is from Acton. She is the Republican nominee for this seat. Tara Friedrichs is from Acton, and she is running as the Cooperative Green Economy nominee. We will begin with Senator Eldridge first for 30-second opening, please.
Great. Thank you, Patty. I want to thank the Acton Area League of Women Voters for hosting tonight's candidates forum. Great to be here with Tara and Margaret. I am running on 5 core issues, and I really believe it's important to be bold if we're serious about solving these challenges. Dramatically increasing state aid for education, investing in transportation, protecting our environment, expanding access to clean energy, and creating jobs, not only here in Acton, but throughout the Middlesex and Worcester District. What I hope to do throughout the debate is highlight the ideas and suggestions I take from my constituents, including here in Acton, and turn that into action with real results in the state Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Friedrichs, please.
Yes, I also would like to thank everybody for coming and for the League for organizing, and thanks for being here, both of you. I believe that we have to face up to the fact that we have crises. We are headed for a fiscal crisis, a crisis of democracy, and a social crisis, and that we can solve these problems if we actually admit that we are headed for these crises and have courageous solutions. They're outside the norm. I think it's time for fresh ideas and new faces, and I hope that you vote for me. Thank you.
And Ms. Bussey.
Thank you. I echo the thanks to everyone for being here and for the League as well for hosting, and I'm excited to be here with Tara and Jamie. I got into this race really for 2 reasons. One is that I am passionate about public service and about serving the 14 different communities in this district by empowering local leaders, parents, individual citizens, to really make sure that we have access to the greatest jobs, the greatest schools, and the strongest communities. I am also passionate about seeking and finding ways to pull people together. I did this in my time at the Acton 2020 Committee and in the Acton Finance Committee, and I believe in this time of divisiveness, polarization, and extremism, we need a leader who can do this. Thank you.
Hard to fit in everything in 30 seconds. So, we want to know how your campaign is financed. Ms. Friedrich.
I believe that we should get money out of politics. I think that we should have totally funded, publicly funded elections so that no private money is in these elections. I take no money. I've made a commitment to run by spending less than the amount of money a minimum wage worker makes in a week, in the hopes that we can open the ballot up to as many people as possible so that we can have as many choices as possible. I started pass mass amendment so that we could leverage state authority and use our state rights to lower the amount of campaign donation limits. And instead, the legislature keeps raising them. So I feel like we can do this now. The legislature keeps talking about solving the problem, but then nothing happens, so that we focus on the U.S. amendment, which is a great thing to have, but we could do it now, so why not? And so I feel like we should declare that corporations are not people at the state level. I feel like we should reduce the amount of money allowed to be spent. Currently, we're having a petition to reduce the out-of-state spending from thousands of dollars down to $100 per person per candidate. And I hope you join me in urging our legislature to do this. I believe that I have the skills to be able to convince people on Beacon Hill to do these things. I work across the aisle, and whether it's extreme progressive Democrats, whether it's Republicans, Democrats, I have the ability to bring people together. If you look at the people who are supporting me, they're from all walks of life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Bussey.
My campaign is financed through private donations, no corporate PACs and no unions.
Okay.
I guess I could say more, and that's the
right.
question, but I will say that I think the interesting thing about campaign finance here in Massachusetts is that there actually are pretty stringent limits in some ways that I think many of us in the room would support. Corporations can't make any donations to campaigns. However, one of the interesting loopholes is that while general PACs can only make a $500 donation to a campaign, and individuals can make a $1,000 donation to a campaign, unions can make $15,000 donation to campaigns. So to me, this is a pretty big loophole that I think needs to be closed if we're serious about campaign finance. In addition, I believe that we need to look at not just how money comes in, but also how money goes out. Right? I think that one of the things that has sort of shocked me is how little regulation there is on how we actually spend the money. So our current state senator, and actually many in our state government right now, spend their campaign dollars on things like meals, gifts for colleagues, things that you wouldn't think would really qualify as campaign necessities. And so to me, we need to start looking not just on how money comes in, but on how money goes out.
Thank you. Senator Eldridge, how is your campaign financed?
Yes, so first of all, I strongly agree with Tara that we need to get big money out of politics. And when I first ran for the legislature for state representative, I was the only clean elections publicly financed candidate ever get elected to the Massachusetts legislature. Unfortunately, some of my Democratic colleagues and Republican colleagues voted to repeal that law, and Governor Romney signed that bill into law. So it is difficult to raise money privately. I do not accept any corporate PACs. I do not accept any corporate lobbyist donations. I do want to note that big money does have an influence in these races. I do want to note, and if you look at OCPF, that my Republican challenger, Margaret Bussey, has loaned herself $50,000, and the reality is not everybody has that amount of money to loan to their campaigns. I certainly don't. In terms of how I use my campaign money, I've run a very strong grassroots campaign, hired staff to go door to door in each of the 14 communities, have a campaign office in South Acton where we're focused on reaching out to voters and talking to them about my ideas and why I'm committed to continuing serving this district. In terms of moving forward in the legislature to get big money out of politics, I am very proud to have filed and passed the Massachusetts Disclose Act to require disclosure by super PACs. And I refiled my bill to bring back the Clean Elections Bill to get big money out of politics and to bring back public financing, which would level the playing field, especially for those who are less well off and especially those who live in poorer communities.
Beginning with Ms. Bussey. State voters approved the 2016 ballot question legalizing marijuana. What should the legislature do to ensure that this ballot initiative is equitably implemented in a timely manner?
Well, what I'll say here is that I did not support the ballot initiative. However, recreational marijuana is now legal, And so my position on it is that we need to make sure that communities can determine their own destiny when it comes to whether or not they want to host recreational marijuana shops in their towns. We've seen this played out in communities across the state, certainly in this district. Different communities have decided different things. Many people from Acton obviously know that we have a ballot initiative on this November's ballot about whether or not we want to allow pot shops in this town. And I support that. I support communities to be able to determine their own destiny. I also think we need to be incredibly cautious on how we roll this out. There's many things we don't know about how legalization of marijuana works in different states since it's such a new experiment. So we need to be cautious. Our current state senator has, from my view, really embraced this whole idea of legalization of marijuana and has criticized Governor Baker and the commission for wanting to be cautious in the rollout of legalized marijuana. When we know that has very negative effects on children specifically, I think we need to be very cautious in how we roll it out.
Ms. Eldridge? I'm sorry, Senator Eldridge. I just had to wake everybody up.
I was waiting for that. So 2 years ago, the voters did approve the legalization of recreational marijuana for adults. I want to emphasize, for adults, for those aged 21 or over. The voters of Acton voted to approve that, and many of the other communities I represent also voted, and of course it passed statewide. What the legislature did, recognizing that there was some concern over implementation, and we wanted to put in those safeguards, both for adults and for those, for students or young people, is that we delayed by 6 months the implementation of the law. There were a lot of people that were upset with that, but we wanted to get it right. I did serve on the Joint Committee on Marijuana, which always gets a laugh. What the committee did was it made sure that there are packaging and labeling requirements for recreational marijuana. It allowed cities and towns to vote, just as Acton has, just as Boxborough has, other communities in my district, to ban or put a moratorium on the sale of recreational marijuana for adults. So we made sure that there is local input at the city or town level. There are communities in this district that are going forward to sell recreational marijuana. That is what they wanted to do. But as a legislator, we look to balance that out. So we're moving forward with the licenses happening fairly soon in a couple other communities outside of this district. And we wanted to make sure there's local control while also fulfilling the will of the voters, which was to approve to legalize recreational marijuana for adults.
Ms. Friedrichs?
Yes, I believe that we have the right to grow food and medicine ourselves, but I also understand that people are nervous and afraid. And so I believe that there should be more ability for the localities to ban or restrict. I've been sitting in on the hearings, and I feel like the state law leaves a little more room, or leaves the towns handcuffed to be able to limit the amount of stores, for example. That said, the question was about, equity, I believe it was about equity as well, and so I want to make sure that we understand that the law that was passed was to ensure that that the licenses were given to people that traditionally were held, that were put in jail. The communities that suffered the most should have access to these licenses, and now the structure and the bureaucracy that's created and the requirements for security, lights, and armored cars is making it impossible for communities of color to access these licenses. And so I'm working with the commission to reduce the amount of bureaucracy and the fees to allow more people to participate. And so, again, I understand the desire to ban, and I think that towns should be able to ban, but for the record, people can get it delivered to their home now, regardless of the license, whether it's lawful or not. Thank you very much.
Senator Eldridge, what actions should the legislature take to protect immigrants and their families?
Yes, well, I'm very proud to be the Senate lead sponsor of the Safe Communities Act, legislation that passed in the Senate this session. And it's important to note that the discussion around how local and state law enforcement interact with undocumented immigrants in many ways began here in Acton when there was a very early discussion here at Acton Town Hall before the Board of Selectmen, which led to the Acton police officer, the police chief, implementing a version of Safe Communities, which basically said that ICE agents who, in my opinion, are tearing families apart regardless of whether or not someone who's undocumented has committed a crime, is damaging to the economy. And so what the Acton police chief did is create a clear policy that police officers would not be collaborating with ICE agents unless it was for a specific crime that was being committed. The example is someone who's getting pulled over for speeding, and that person who is the driver is going to the police station, and ICE agents issue a detainer, that the police would not honor that detainer unless that person had a criminal record. Immigration law is extremely confusing to explain, but what the bill would do is it would create that separation and make sure that there's the trust between immigrant communities. If they see a crime in their community, if is an incidence of domestic violence in the household, they feel comfortable to call the local or state police and not fear the risk of being deported or targeted by ICE agents.
And Ms. Friedrichs, please.
Yes, actually the language that was approved by the police in Acton was developed by a small team of people, including myself. And I had concern from the people in a lot of people in Acton about calling the policy sanctuary, because really what we're talking about is due process. And I think we all agree that every person deserves the due process provided for under our Constitution. I feel like the Safe Communities Act has a hole in it that it would codify federal regulation into Massachusetts state law, which I think is very dangerous, to allow federal overreach to come into our towns and dictate what we're going to do. I feel like we should expand the due process that we're doing in Acton to include limiting how much information that police officers are sending around on everybody, but not only that, but to protect the residents in Acton and other towns. I think the police should be arresting federal agents that are bothering people that are not provided for under a warrant. And I feel like that we should be very careful about allowing our state funds to be used to do what the federal government is doing. I'm very nervous about the federal government creating a standing army by indoctrinating local police with training and equipment, and very slowly kind of boiling the frogs before they notice. And I feel like we have to take action now. Thank you very much.
Ms. Bussey.
Thank you. So I oppose the Safe Communities Act, which is also known as the sanctuary state legislation. I think that it actually puts all of our families at risk, immigrant families and non-immigrant families at risk, because it does not allow local law enforcement to coordinate with federal law enforcement. Now, specifically, it doesn't allow local law enforcement to coordinate with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. Remember that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency includes customs. These are the guys that are keeping out fentanyl, the deadly opioid, from our state. In fact, and from our country, they kept out 2,400 pounds of fentanyl last year alone. That would equate to 1.6 billion doses of fentanyl out of our country. Just a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if you guys saw it in the news, but there was a big bust of a big crime ring in Lawrence that they confiscated what they said was enough fentanyl to kill half of Massachusetts. We need ICE agents to be able to coordinate with our local law enforcement to get the job done. In fact, the U.S. Attorney here in Massachusetts said that if Lawrence, where this happened, had not been a sanctuary city, they would have been able to get that job done a lot faster and maybe even save some lives because of it. We are in the middle of a huge opioid epidemic. We do not need to tie the hands of local law enforcement.
And Patty, may I give a quick response to that?
Everybody can have a very quick response to that.
I do want to highlight that, to Margaret, that Lawrence actually is a sanctuary city. It passed the policy 2 years ago.
That's what I just said.
It is a sanctuary city,
Yes.
and the point is that the police there say that then they're able to work with the immigrant community without fear of undocumented immigrants who haven't committed a crime interacting with the police. So that's the point, is creating a statewide policy to the success that you speak to of the drug bust in Lawrence. So actually, respectfully, I think what you're speaking to is that if you had the statewide policy, it would make every community more safe, just like Lawrence was made more safe by this drug bust.
Ms. Friedrichs?
If we want to apprehend more opioids, I think we should pay the police to go do that, although with limits, of course. I think that using the opioid crisis to make an inroad for the federal government to create a standing army in Massachusetts, I think is very dangerous. Thank you.
And Ms. Bussey, please.
So yes, so the U.S. Attorney and ICE officials said they could have gotten that job done faster. They could have been able to take the fentanyl off of the streets of Lawrence had they been able to work with the local law enforcement.
And the mic will stay with you for the next question. The Center for Public Integrity ranks Massachusetts 41st for state budget processes in its 2015 state integrity investigation. What steps, if any, should the legislature take to improve the integrity of the state budget process?
Thank you. So I think transparency is just a huge issue. One of the things that in my 8 years in town government that I learned all about and practiced was the idea of open meeting law. And I think that's an incredibly important example for how we can be more transparent. At the state legislature level, some of those checks in the legislature are not there to be fully transparent. And I think that's really unfortunate. I think one of the reasons that is that we have a concentration of power at the state legislature. We have a supermajority of Democrats. So there's really not an effective check on that power to create more transparency in the process. In order to create transparency, you have to have a check on power. And I think also, I think because of that, not just transparency, but the ability to get the budget done has been in question. This past year, our state legislature was held up, the budget was 3 weeks late in getting it to Governor Baker, and the reason it was 3 weeks late was held up by the sanctuary state budget amendment that was proposed by our current state senator.
Ms. Friedrichs?
Well, I agree on open meeting law, that's for sure. We do not manage our state budget or any of the expenditures at the state level or any of the policies by balance sheet. So all the decisions, nobody tracks on how much that's going to cost down the road. They do some light analysis, but just as one example, about half of our pension benefit doesn't even show up, pension obligation doesn't show up on the balance sheet. So it's really a disaster coming that we hardly even know what the result is going to be. But I'll just give you one example. There was a zoning relief package that was being proposed to further give developers control of our towns, and nobody did a water study on the statewide level. I did a quick study, and so there was not enough water in Quabbin for all the towns that keep saying that they'll just use Quabbin if they run out of local water. The State House people told me that was the best analysis they've seen, and I said, oh my goodness, if that's the best analysis, not that I don't know what I'm talking about, but I think that should be done by a state agency. Same thing on all the social obligations, the pension obligations, the healthcare obligations. All these obligations are coming due, and we have no way to figure out what's good. Until we admit what the obligations are, we will not be able to solve this problem. It's going to hit us straight in the head. And so I feel like with climate change, for example, why not solve these problems now? Poverty is cheaper to solve poverty with a minimum income guarantee than it is to continue the industrial complexes that live off of poor people, that we can take care of these issues. Thank you.
Senator Eldridge.
Yes, well, there certainly needs to be improvements in transparency in state government. I will say that the mass.gov website recently won a national award on accessibility. If you go to the Massachusetts Legislature's website, you can now track a bill, find out which committee it's in, where it's been reported out. So we have made improvements and investments over the past couple of years. I've been proud to lead the fight on government transparency on a number of levels. In the state Senate, 4 years ago, we instituted that all roll calls be placed online within the Senate within 24 hours. That had not been done before. So now it's much easier for the public to see how senators are voting. On the state budget front, passed legislation that then State Treasurer Steve Grossman implemented, the open checkbook. And that tells you that when we pass our state budget, exactly where the money is going. And on the campaign finance front, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, I was very proud to be the lead sponsor of the Massachusetts Disclose Act 6 years ago that required that super PACs, when they're spending super PACs, and I'm sure you're seeing a lot of the ads now on the different ballot initiatives, they have to state where the top 5 donors are coming from. Before then, we did not know where this money was coming from, so that's an important step. I do think more needs to be done, though. I do think we need to look at further recording of roll calls within committees, and I also think on the campaign finance front, beyond getting back to public campaign finance, I think we need to pass stronger legislation to call on our federal delegation to overturn the Citizens United decision.
Beginning with Ms. Friedrichs. What, if anything, would you change about how the state funds education? And what results would you seek to achieve with these changes?
Well, I'm going to take Danny's idea, which is to have all schools paid for and run by the state so that we make everything equal. And then if you have localities that want to fund things themselves, go ahead. But there needs to be a basic level of quality throughout the state for all the schools. When I was doing hurricane relief for Hurricane Katrina, we were gathering up computers from all over the place and textbooks. I was shocked to find out how many schools in Massachusetts had 10-year-old textbooks, and I found out that communities like Acton, God love us, we were changing textbooks every couple years. And so in terms of computers, we were seeing like 20-year-old computers in schools in Fitchburg and Gardner, and we're pretty good in this region, but I feel like we got to advocate for more equity in the schools. Also for special needs, I feel like everybody deserves the reasonable access to education to become the person who they're meant to be, and I feel like we're really handcuffing schools by not funding special needs education appropriately. I also feel like we're too heavy on tests, and I feel like the state should get out of the testing business. And I feel like there should be more freedom to have free schools, which is where they have the facilities and the kids have a natural curiosity. They want to learn. And when you bring them to a place and you give them all the assets and you allow them to learn, that they do it themselves. Thank you.
Senator Eldridge.
Yes, my top priority, if reelected, would be to dramatically increase state aid for our public schools, specifically K through 12. And the Senate and House passed different versions of implementing the Education Foundation Budget Review Commission recommendations. This would really benefit the Acton-Boxborough School District and every school district in the communities that I represent. This would increase funding for special education, ELL, English language learners, low-income students, and healthcare costs, which continue to grow for every school district. So it's absolutely critical that we reduce classroom sizes, that we offer more electives, we provide better support for our teachers. And the reality is unless we're dramatically increasing state aid, it's going to more and more rely on property taxes, which are extremely regressive. Now, what at least Democratic legislators were hoping to see this fall was the millionaire's tax. It would have passed a tax above anyone who earned over $1 million a year, an additional 4%. It would have raised $2 billion a year, half of it committed to education, half of it committed to transportation. Margaret and I had a debate last night in Marlborough, and we do have a difference of opinion on the millionaire's tax. I am a strong supporter of it, and I voted for it. Margaret is opposed to it. And the reality is, if we're really serious about increasing state aid for education, the money has to come somewhere. I think we need to tax those who are well off, those who are wealthy, and fund that to benefit public education for everyone. It's absolutely critical here in Massachusetts, the home of education.
Ms. Bussey.
Thank you. So a couple of things on education. First, as the chair of the Acton Finance Committee, one of the things that I saw as I worked with the budgets for the school budgets and the town budgets is that the schools are incredibly burdened by an array of unfunded mandates. This makes it very hard for the school committee to really control the costs. And every year we would get, ballooning budgets from the schools that we were trying to control so that we keep property taxes down for our citizens in Acton. This happens in every single community in this district and throughout the state. What happens, we've all seen it at town meeting. People go, the parents of school kids, they want to make sure the schools are good, so they vote for the school budget. The people that don't have kids often don't want to vote for that. They feel like they're getting pushed out of the community because of higher property taxes. And that creates divisiveness in communities, and it also means that people have to feel like they have to leave their communities. And I don't think that's right. People should be able to stay in their communities and be able to afford the property taxes. So first, I would be a huge advocate for reducing those funded, those unfunded mandates that are coming down from the state and give more local control to the school district. Also, one thing I think we have to remember about schools is that, the CFO of the Boston School District actually said to me, the biggest thing that she has learned is how unrelated money is to school performance, right? There's other things that are involved. We need to get more parental involvement and push for better reforms in our schools. And as the parent of 5 children, I can say that's important.
So I'm going to make an executive decision here, give you 1 minute for these next questions so we can fit in a couple more. We've heard this question to other candidates. This one is being asked of you. What will you do to keep the temperature rise to less than 2 degrees Celsius? And please be specific. Senator Eldridge.
Yes, this is one of my top 5 priorities I talked about at the beginning, combating climate change. Massachusetts is one of the leaders in the country, but I think we need to do more. I was proud to pass a strong clean energy bill this session that required utility companies to purchase more alternative energy, but to really be serious about reducing making sure the rising temperature stops or goes back to decreasing, we need to be bold. And so I'm very proud to file the 100% renewable energy bill. This is a bill that passed in California recently that would put Massachusetts on track to move to 100% renewable energy by 2050. The town of Acton has been a leader. It's been a leading Green Communities Act, has been a leader in its schools in reducing energy costs. Part of that is passing a carbon pricing, but I think a critical piece is passing the solar and wind, offshore wind incentives that we passed in the legislature this session and going even bolder next session.
Ms. Bussey.
Thank you. So my husband and I just received an email recently that said that we had, over the course of the years that we've had our solar panels on our house, that we have reduced having we have eliminated 32 tons of CO2 going into the environment. So I was very happy about that. I'm a big supporter of renewable energy. I think it's incredibly important. However, I think that we can't take sort of a winner, sorry, I'm getting lost here. We can't take an all or nothing approach. And I think that's what's being taken by our current state senator. So it's a wonderful goal to want to have 100% renewable energy, but right now it's just not realistic. Even professors at MIT are saying we can't get there. We don't have the battery storage power to get there right now. We can work towards that, but in the meantime, we're going to have to rely on other sources of energy. And even the Boston Globe called out Senator Eldridge and others at the state capitol because we are now reliant on Russian oil because we can't get our own. And that's not right.
Ms. Friedrichs.
First, I'd like to correct something. We are energy independent. The gas that's going in these pipelines, these new pipelines, is leaving the country. It's not for here, and it's not needed. Secondly, I think that Jamie's not been as bold as I think he could be. I believe that we should stop all unnecessary building immediately. 2/3 of all building permits are for people who are moving to the state. Relying on growth, endless growth, is not the solution. We have plenty of buildings. We need to enact a transfer tax to pay for affordable housing so we don't have to build for people. I think we need to make people pay for what they use. The carbon tax does not include the full cost of the cost of the carbon that's being burned. A carbon fee needs to be enacted. We need to keep track of all decisions and how much that impacts our climate, each decision. So we don't manage on balance sheet, folks. We don't manage by assets or obligations. So we don't keep track of our climate, our environmental obligations for every decision they're making. Thank you.
And may I make a quick response to Margaret?
No.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Talk to him later, talk to all of your candidates later, but we have another section we're going to have to go to. So with apologies for the people who wrote questions that we did not get to, but with an effort to try and stay within our timeline, I'm going to bring us to a close and ask for your 1-minute closing statements, which is your opportunity. And we will begin with Ms. Friedrichs.
I believe that we should enact progressive taxation as soon as possible so that the people who have the money pay for the services that we need and the things that we need to become sustainable as a state. We do not currently tax, our current tax for a transfer of real estate, for example, is a 0.1% or something like that. I think it should be 10%. People who have and own real estate should pay for, when they buy and sell, with an exemption for a one-time person and for very affordable housing. I feel like now is the time to start having people who have the money pay for the services that we need. I believe that housing is a right. I believe we have enough buildings that we'd have to buy the buildings and split them up and have them reserved for affordable housing. I think that we have to take these bold actions now because it's just getting worse. So our debt, our fiscal, social, and environmental debt is getting bigger and bigger as we refuse to address these solutions. Thank you.
Senator Eldridge.
Well, once again, I want to thank the League for hosting tonight's Candidates Forum. And again, what I've been focused on and will continue to be focused on if reelected is dramatically increasing state aid for education, investing in transportation, protecting the environment, expanding access to clean energy, and creating jobs throughout the region and throughout the Middlesex and Worcester district. For next session, what I would hope to accomplish on the education front is passing the Foundation Budget Review Commission. On the environmental front is dramatically increasing the number of staffers with the DEP and looking to get our rivers, streams, and lakes back to a place where we can fish in them again, we can swim in them again. It's a bold goal, but I think we need to be bold in Massachusetts. On expanding clean energy, we need to move to 100% renewable energy. And on investing in transportation, expand on the improvements in this area, in the commuter rail and the shuttle system, the Region Transit Authority, to make sure everyone has access to affordable transportation. And finally, creating jobs. Creating jobs is critical for the district, and that's why I ask for your vote on Tuesday, November 6th. Thank you.
Ms. Bussey.
Thank you. It's been great to be here tonight. Thanks again to the League of Women Voters for hosting. I think tonight you've heard very different visions of what this district, the Senate district can be and what Massachusetts can be under our different leadership. My opponents want to create huge government programs, spend more money. We didn't even talk about the $32 billion price tag that would be attached to the government-run health care that's proposed by Senator Eldridge that would nearly double our current state budget and all the massive tax increases that would come along with that. So I think this puts our communities at risk when we're already ranked number 47 out of 50 in terms of our fiscal health in the state of Massachusetts, and we have one of the highest state debts per capita in the entire country. I instead want to unleash innovation in our economy, support small business, turn over more control to our local leaders, our parents, and our individual citizens. So again, we can make sure that we have access to great schools, great communities, and great jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all to the great candidates. Great range.
To the League. I know how trying to get local control. How does local control reconcile with the feds coming in and taking?
So there'll be a slight pause while we move into our final segment for this evening. Thank you all.
Yep. Good job again.
Oh, thanks.